Billy, let's begin at the beginning. What do you consider the most important fundamentals for bass players?
Well, as ridiculous as it may sound, one thing that is kind of my pet peeve for young bassists coming up and stuff is, believe it or not, the strap length. My strap is just one piece. It doesn't adjust because I know the perfect length for me after 20-some years of playing, you know, that I know it's going to be there. And you notice when I'm practicing, if I'm sitting down, the bass sits right here, and you do all your stuff with it. And when you stand up, it's in the same spot. So you're always used to it being at the same spot on your body. Whether you like it high or low is your own personal preference, but as long as it's on the same spot, if you're practicing and then move, all your angles change, everything moves. So I like to try to encourage people to get that one spot that they're going to put the bass and leave it, and then work on everything from there. So it's just real important for me. I see a lot of players, you know, reaming away in the dressing rooms, get up on stage, and the bass is in a completely different spot, and they can't do it, and they come back, you know, blaming their roadie or their amp or whatever, you know. It's usually, surprisingly enough, just to get your strap in the right spot is really important.
You've mentioned in the past having the fewest possible variables.
Yeah.
This is really an extension of that, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the first variable, really, where the bass is. You know, once it's in position on your body, and then worry about getting your arms close to it, and then you're down to your elbows and wrists, and then eventually to your fingertips. But it all bases off that one solid spot. And it sounds ridiculously stupid and elementary, but it's really important. A lot of people...
Maybe easily ignored, huh?
Yeah, that's probably why. A lot of fundamental things are easily ignored.
What about things like action and the feeling of the fingers on the strings? How should you adjust your action, ideally, for optimum performance?
Well, it's hard for a beginning player because they don't know what's right or wrong yet because they haven't had the experience of doing it. But I generally set my action to the point where it buzzes and then lift it up from there, down to where it buzzes and lift it up from there. If you can get a good repairman, he can hone your neck down and do a job on your frets, so you can get the action really low and have it not buzz at all. But I get it pretty low, and then again, as I said, raise it up so it's not flopping around and buzzing, because it's a happy medium. You can set up the bass for perfect studio tone where you get no buzz or rattle at all. Or for me, it's pretty ratty all the time because I'm more of a live player, of course, than a studio player. So mine is a little buzzy and rattly, but I personally prefer that because like Chris Squire's tone and Roundabout, that grind and grunge is great. You know, that's you know, you hear some character in there, some noise. To me, you know, playing a rock and roll band is about as far from perfection as you could get. So you know, a little noise actually adds to it, I think.
What about string spacing, the distance between the strings?
Well, it's pretty,
for action.
Usually they're not very adjustable, but I wish companies would stick with standards. There should be a basic Fender and a basic Gibson spacing, because that's the two basses that pretty much started out everything. So as a matter of fact, on this bass here, the Gibson spacing you can see is you know, the strings are outside of its spacing. That's the standard Gibson spacing. Where the Fender spacing, where these DiMarzio pickups are made, you know, they're right in on that. So it's a little off on here. But wider spaced strings give your fingers a chance to get in between if you're a finger player. It's real important.
Right. Now, what about string tension itself? How does that affect technique, the tension of the strings?
Well, however tight the strings are determines how much they're going to flap around and buzz on the fretboard. I would discourage anyone from using a real light set of strings because you know, bass is a real strength instrument. It takes a lot of strength to play it, more so than a guitar. And I prefer to encourage people to put as much into it to get as much out, use a real strength kind of point of view.
Could you tell us a little bit about your development in the early years as a player, what you got from your early influences?
Well, first major influence probably was the Yardbirds, Paul Samwell Smith. So. Great bass solos, great bass tone. I just forgot the idea for the EVO style pickup. Super deep low end, I'm a Man, having a rave up with the Yardbirds, totally great playing.
One of the early prototype heavy bands, too.
Oh yeah, totally great, real metal, if you wanted to call it that metal and mono, I guess you'd call it. But it was great. Him, and then you know, the Beatles and all the pop, British Invasion came through all the songs.
A lot from McCartney, melodic sense.
Yeah, McCartney's a way overlooked bass player, way underrated. Like, you know, all the Rain and stuff,
Yeah.
and you know, it's great stuff. Really cool, great tones too. Really built the band, and a lot of what you see now in bass players for the whole song, it's just really, bass just wasn't like that back then. Motown, Jamie Jamerson, all over the place. A fundamental element of the song was a bass line.
Right.
Move the whole song. It made the whole song happen. So that's stuff I kind of grew up on, things that really were an important part of the song. Bass parts that were part of the song, not soloing or not just thudding along, you know, eighth notes on the, you know, along with the single disco beat bass drum, you know. There's a lot more happening back then as far as, you know, writing goes. Then I got into Tim Bogart was probably my biggest real big bass influence. Tim Bogart from Vanilla Fudge.
And he influenced you technically too, didn't
Yeah,
he?
real technically. He's still my hero. He's the greatest. I got all my raking techniques from him. I think the bass he played on the first Vanilla Fudge record to this day is set the standard for the ability of a bass to move in the context of a song and just take it to places where it just wouldn't have gone without him, you know. It's really incredible. Jack Bruce, Cream, unbelievable. All the live stuff. I just did an interview with him together recently for a magazine cover and for a big article story about, you know, bass back then and now. And it's real interesting to hear his point of view on three-piece bands and stuff and how much the bass is really a part of things, you know. That's what I
identify a lot with what he said.
Oh, absolutely. We were like right on the money, both kind of same thing. It was pretty cool. And he had a great voice and a great songwriter. Totally amazing. John Entwistle, Chris Squire, you know, you name them.
Did the sound of roto sounds come from Chris Squire?
Yeah, Chris Squire. Well, actually, it came more from John Entwistle, I think, for me. But when Chris Squire came out, he popularized it for everybody. That grinding bass tone, totally cool. He was a great player. A guy in my neighborhood that started me playing bass, Joe Hesse, he actually gave me my first set of roto sounds, a used set off his bass, and once I tried him, like back in 1971, I think it was, once I put him on, I couldn't try anything else again, you know, so that was how long I've been playing him. So that's kind of where that tone came from. But and other than that, you know, Jocko, and then everything, you know, Oscar Peterson piano, I used to listen to a lot, Sonny Rollins, jazz sax player, Herbie Mann.
Yeah. Frank Zappa.
Frank Zappa heavily, all my 7/4 and 5/4, learning odd time signatures, and he was the king of that, you know, so I learned a lot. I can, you know, from memory, sing you, you know, his whole first 10 records, you know. Me and Steve Vai on the tour bus on the first Dave tour, we could sing every Frank Zappa song there was, with every little nuance. It was funny. So we learned a lot of that, and yeah, it's about everything. Anything in music is an influence.
Including things like Bach even, right?
Yeah, well, Bach I got into real heavily very early on, way early 70s, and everybody's like, it's a buzzword now, I listen to classical music, and I said, you know, I'd much rather go listen to something that no one else is listening to, you know, like pedal steel guitar or ethnic music, something that not everybody's into, because I've always, as a player, I've always tried to go towards something different than what everyone else was doing, and it's been successful for me so far, so I continue that. Instead of going with how everyone else is being influenced, go somewhere else, you know.
What have you done over the years to make your bass unique?
Well, with my Fender bass, this is basically an imitation of the Fender. The Fender's so beat over the years. Here, I'll show you here. This Fender is so beat, I'm always worried about it not making it to the next gig sometimes, because it's just been through. This is this is the only finish left on the poor thing, you know. And as far as what I've done to it over the years, I've just played so long, so many times, so many hot, sweaty nights, that the bass kind of wears into you. So now when I get a new bass, like the Yamaha, I have to mimic all the wear on the new bass. So on this here, remember I was talking about the position for your thumb?
Yes.
That's natural wear into the pickguard. It's a multi-layered Fender pickguard, so that's all natural wear. If you can see, there's wear spots here, all along here. It's all wear from where my thumb goes all along, you know. So I've like worn this thing into, you know, worn it out practically, you know. So it's, and I get used to an instrument. It's a good idea for players when you're starting out to pick pick an instrument and stick with it, because you'll find your body starts to shape out. Right now, if I stand up, my ribs go in on this side from this bass being up against me. My shoulder goes down on the left from holding it, so my body's permanently crippled from holding on to a 30 pounds of Fender bass for so long, whatever. But so you really fit into it. It becomes such a natural part of you after a while. So to change basses, get a new bass is very tough to do. So anything I do to the instrument, I try to mimic on my new instruments what happened naturally to my Fender after years and years and years of playing. So I knew that was going to happen. And so now on this bass, basically, I've used this for all the recording I've done recently, and I've used it a little bit live. But it's so hard to get used to anything different than the Fender. Right. So what I've done with this bass to get it more closer to what I like, I've actually worn down here with a little moto tool. I faked the actual wear there, so it feels the same. And basically I had to take like 600 grit sandpaper and just take all the shine off, because if it's too shiny, it's too slippery.
Right.
But that bass is like bare wood, so it just sticks on my body. I've had to like put this tape and stuff on there to make it
traction.
Feel. Yeah, give it to like the stuff you put on your bathtub so you don't slip and things like that, and just wear it down and make it feel worn in.
You scalp the fretboard and things like that too, don't you?
Yeah, I started to scalp this one, but I was on my way to Japan under the auspices of Yamaha, and I didn't want to beat their beautiful bass. They were kind enough to give me too bad, so I ended up not doing my homespun scalloping job that I did annihilate my Fender with. So that's I will do it though. The purpose of that is when you do that high bends,
you get a little more bend.
You get a little of that wood out of the way there, and it tends to, when your hands are hot and sweaty or whatever, you tend to catch up on that wood a little bit. So so that's what that's for. But basically, I just wear the thing down.
What about your detuner?
Yeah, this Hipshot detuner, great little deal. For years, I used to tune down to low D live, and I'd have to tune in between while the singer's trying to say something, or something in the dead air there. All people are streaming out of the bar, But I saw an ad for this in one of the guitar magazines, and it's like, fell from the heavens. Perfect, exactly what I needed. So it's a real simple device. It just takes your tuning key and mounts it on a little thing that you can just flip it. It just moves the whole thing down, so you don't change the tuning at all. Stays right in. Drop it down to low D, back to an E. Works, perfect right in tune. Back up to the E. So it works great. If you got to make sure and pull the string really super tightly. That's when I put my strings on. I always torque them down on that tuning key with all my strength, pulling each one as hard as I can, so that as you're playing and bending strings, you're not going to pull yourself out of tune. I see guys playing a lot and bending strings, and halfway through the night, the bass is hopelessly out of tune. So I always keep it torqued as heavy as I can. When I put a new set of strings on, I tune them up extra sharp, let them sit for a while, then tune them back down and squeeze them and pull them as hard as possible before they break, just to make sure they're all worked in good, so when I go up on stage and play, I almost never have a tuning problem. I almost never break a string. I haven't broken a string for probably about 6 or 7 years now. Actually, used properly, they won't break.
This is a special set of strings for you too, isn't it?
Yeah, I think they're going to actually make some kind of Billy Sheehan deal set or something. I don't know, but this is my suggestion, and they seem excited about it. So I think they're going to actually package it up. It's basically a standard set of rotosound strings, but the G is a little bit lighter and the E is a little bit heavier. It evens the tension out. It gives you a nice big, fatter, heavier low end, which all bass players could probably use. And if you tune down to a low D, because the E string is a little bit heavier, the tension stays there. It doesn't flop around as much. And again, on the G, you tend to, it makes it a little easier to bend. And since the G is usually way tighter than the other strings on a bass, this evens out the tension a little bit more. So it really makes it even across the neck. Really helps your right hand technique out. It does for me. So hopefully they'll put it together and do a package a set of strings like that.
What about your pickups and actual electronics in the guitar?
All passive. I don't use any active stuff, because every time you got an active thing, you're always wondering, is it the battery?
Yeah.
Is something, that...
Fused variables.
Yeah, exactly, because you never know. Is it distorting a little bit? It doesn't sound quite like it did last night. maybe it's the battery. You know, it's always because you never know.
Then you become
somehow
a
they put
battery
a brand new
junkie.
battery in, but for some reason it lost. You know, you never know. So it's that one mystery that I hate having. So it's always passive electronics. DiMarzio pickups. I've used DiMarzios for years. It's just loud, good sounding, fat, honking pickup. Straight to a volume control out. My bass has two outputs, as you see. One is for the DiMarzio output, and the other one is for the, I use either a DiMarzio Model 1 or an old Gibson EBO humbucker, big fat, super low-end bass. So I run 2 amps, one clean, or one super deep low-end and one high-end, so I can mix between high and low on the bass. That's making an awfully long story short, but it's, trust me, and basically, remember the old Rickenbacker basses had a stereo jack, Ricco sound. Yeah, that's the same principle. But back in, I think it was 1971, I actually put my first humbucker on there. So it's been around for a long time. So it actually works out because the humbucker, low-end pickup is the best super deep low-end, and the Fender style, DiMarzio here in this case, is covers everything else. You have the best of both worlds on that.
And you also have a nice place to rest your thumb.
Yeah, it's good thumb rest thing. Oh, it's good point.
What words of wisdom could you give to aspiring bass players who want to be known as bass players for the 90s? What could you tell them?
Find a live, real human being drummer and sit down and work with them and work out songs. And I know it's tough these days to play out clubs because there aren't as many clubs as there were when I was coming up. But if you play live everywhere and anywhere, I played bank openings, football practices for the Buffalo Bills. Never any grocery stores, fortunately. Fashion shows, millions of proms. You know, proms, you had like 2 slow songs. When you got those, the rest of the night, everybody's like sweating, throwing their tuxedos aside, you know, going nuts. So we played everything, you know. It was just a great experience to learn things. Now, when I get out on stage, it's a big stage, there's millions of lights. You know, if something goes wrong, anything happens, I've been there. I've done it a million times, you know. So it's much easier to handle. And to see young players be able to get that kind of experience is the thing I would really like to see best. You know, that's most important. You
Any suggestions for how they could do that? Just lock in with a live band?
Yeah, live band, and you have to make
Practice a lot live?
Yeah, well, I learned most everything I do live, on stage in front of people. I didn't really sit home and figure it out. It all came like from a bolt from the blue. I learned about modes on stage. I was in Pittsburgh playing at this club called Stage 1 years ago, and a friend of mine had taught me about the modes, but I didn't understand I didn't get the deal. What does he mean by modes and this position? All of a sudden, and all of a sudden the fretboard just exploded like the significance of it, you know, it looked like this big. It's, oh, now I see, you know, right there, right live on the, you know, in front of people, I actually figured out, you know, finally a little bit about music, you know. So, you know, to get up in front of people is the essential thing, you know, and it's sad that you can't do it, but you gotta get a band that does something that people will dig. You gotta know how to appeal to people, and I think a lot of bands sound like it's so original. They're not worried about appealing to people, they're worried about getting a record deal.
Initially, as a bass player, though, if they were just to get with a drummer and work with a drummer, would that be a good enough start?
That's totally where it's at. And listen, cop things off records. Listen to great bass players now. I mean, guys from AC/DC or Judas Priest, maybe unsung heroes, but those guys lay down great, all the funk stuff, great, amazing. I mean, that's the groove, the rhythm and feel and groove to get, you know. Cop that. But so much stuff nowadays is a little bit stiff. That's why I would recommend sitting down with a drummer, you know, a real live guy. Anyway.
Your right-hand technique is really well developed. What can you tell us about your right-hand plucking approach?
Well, that's the most important thing for fingerstyle bass players, your right-hand technique. And the most overlooked aspect of it is having a great spot to anchor your thumb, a great and permanent, well-known spot to have your thumb at all times. So
Home base, huh?
Yes, exactly. All puns intended. And what I do, many years, I started off in the Fender bass, which is the basic Fender precision bass pickup position here, these dual split little guys. And I always have my thumb right in here, which dampens now I have it touching the bass and then up against the pickup itself, and then also up against the E string. which dampens the E string. So with your you're always, your E isn't going to be humming along while you're doing anything.
That cleans up the sound too a bit.
Oh yeah. And when you're playing really loud and everything's feeding back, you got to hang on every string for dear life so it doesn't get out of control. And the other place I put my thumb is right on the next pickup here, which dampens the A string. So when you're nothing else is sounding. Actually, the other part of my thumb is dampening the E string too, so I got them both down. On occasion, I'll even get up to there and put my thumb on the pickup itself for just the G string playing. But the important point is to have a spot for your thumb, whether it be one spot or several spots. I'm just used to that from traveling around over the years. Whenever I do anything, I always have my thumb anchored on the bass. Any like hammer-on stuff on the... Always anchored here. It's actually starting to wear the paint on this bass here. Always have a solid point from which to work. And I keep my wrist locked real solidly. Some instructor was telling some kids the other day to always leave your wrists loose and floating over the instrument. The problem with that is when you're on a 60-foot stage running full blast in front of 20,000 people, the monitors are feeding back, people are throwing stuff. You're going to try to play delicately floating. Ain't going to happen. You know, it's not going to work. You're going to fall on your face, basically. So I really need to lock my arm down on the bass, my thumb in the spot, my wrist locked, and my fingers work. The difference between some players that I see work from this knuckle, where I work from that knuckle there. And the reason for that, you'll see some movement in there, but that's more for positioning. The reason for that is when your finger sweeps like that, it creates a radius about that size.
I see.
And when you sweeps like that, the radius is much smaller. And therefore, that smaller radius fits in between the strings better, so you can actually play one string without hitting every other string while making a sweep. Some players play like that. Stand-up players play like that. You also notice stand-up players have a spot for the thumb. It's on the side of the neck.
Yes.
And that's how they play it. Watch the guy the other night playing stand-up bass. He has his thumb locked down there real solidly, and he's got his spot. And on a stand-up bass, there's not too much difference in how any of them are built. It's the bridge thing and the neck and the fingerboard extension over the body, and they're all like that. The problem with electric bass is many manufacturers, everybody makes one different.
Different configurations.
Yeah, so you never got a good spot for your thumb. That's why I make all my basses with this, make sure they got the old Fender style pickups on them, or I can't really ever play them live, you know, even if it's a real cool custom bass, I have to make and put these pickups in it in order for me to play. So in other words, getting back to where we started from, wrist lock, thumb in a good spot, work from this angle, basically, is how I pluck. And there's even a little bit of technology to how the finger goes over the string. As you tighten this joint, your plucking will become harder because you're digging into it harder. Right. Or you can leave it loose and let it float over, like for raking techniques. Like see, when you're raking across, these are sliding across. This joint here is actually pretty loose, and it's just kind of like working its way across. Now, if you want to play harder, you tighten that joint up. So it's like your tension control.
Right. Dynamics control.
Yeah. Dynamic tension even. Hey, why not do both, you know? But yeah, that's kind of the workings of the joint, how I use it. Now I do a finger exercise sometimes just to make sure I'm really using that part of the joint, which is just try and hold your hand completely still, your fingers completely still, and just work from that joint up one finger at a time without the other ones moving. And it's great at parties too if you want to do drinking bets and to see
That's
people.
True.
No one can ever do it really. Well, it's actually pretty easy, but then you do twos and different groups of them and whatever. But it's just a good way to exercise your hand, keeping stiff from here to here, totally stiff, and then just working from those joints there. Now you'll see me when I'm playing. Of course, I violate those rules all over the place, but that's basically what it comes from. you know, is using that joint like that for 3 fingers.
Exactly. Now, your main approach is a 3-finger approach.
Right.
Could you describe some of those details for us?
Well, since most Western music is in 4, to get 4 out of 3, you have to, when you're plucking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, if you're going to do 4, 1 lands on a different finger each time. Now, there's a little controversy on which way to go when you're plucking. Should you go this way? Some guys want to go back and forth. But if you're sitting at the dentist office and you're nervous, your natural hands are going to fall in that direction. It seems to be that that's the natural way that your fingers move. So therefore, that's the natural
law of physics, almost.
Yeah, kind of the law of hand physics, anyway.
Right.
You know, whatever book that was in. But that's kind of why I eventually got to that direction. To go in the other direction, sometimes I will for exercise. Anytime I do anything, I'll always exercise it backwards, forward, sideways, do it every conceivable way, even in ways that I normally wouldn't do it, just to exercise my muscles around so I'm not stuck in one particular pattern. So, I'm going in this direction. The reason I'm not going back and forth like that is because the middle finger then works twice as much. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. It works twice as much on each passage back and forth. Again, that is a good exercise to do, to learn back and forth. But I always tend to go in that direction. So therefore, if you're going to go in that direction with 3 fingers to do 4, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So in other words, 1 starts on a different finger each time.
Exactly, it's alternation.
So exactly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I start always, incidentally, with my ring finger. Some guys, I guess if you're going the other way, you would start with your index finger.
Would that be considered your heaviest attack finger?
Yeah. You know, I guess I would consider it that way. But, so when I start with that finger, that's 1, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the next finger, the middle finger, begins 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that ends you up perfectly for your index finger to take the next one, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's... So when you're getting real fast and stuff, you will hear 3 in there if you listen closely, but when I get my live calluses and stuff back, you probably won't, you know. It would be so loud you can't tell anyway. But that's kind of the trick of playing fast with 3. Now you can do with a lot of 2-finger techniques out there. Jeff Berlin plays 2-finger technique, unbelievable. I mean, the last thing he needs is another finger, you know. So, but with a 3, for me, it tends to be easier. You know, Iron Maiden, you know, that galloping kind of thing for heavy metal style stuff. It works good for that, you know, because that's all in 3s or groups of 3s. But some guys don't need it. But for me, I prefer the 3-finger technique. So, but there is plenty of valid 2 fingers that use. And when I do use 2 fingers, I usually use these 2 because
index and ring.
Yeah, because these 2 are actually the most even of the 2, or of the 5 here. Left a few out. And that's one thing I left out also. When you work from that joint, you even up the flatness. See, when you have your fingers like this finger sticks way out. As soon as you change them, you get a totally flat surface there, and it makes it easier so that one doesn't stick out over the other.
Right, now they're
so it's funny because of all this stuff you'd think, you know, I've spent years figuring this out and then did it, but in actual fact I did it for years without having a clue as to what it was. So it all kind of developed totally natural by what felt natural to me to play, what actually felt right when I was up on stage, when I wasn't thinking about, you know, what my fingers were doing. Is the last thing you would ever think about on stage. But it all came about from just playing over years and years and years. And then later on, like when I go now, like to Musicians Institute, and somebody asks me a question, I got to stop and think, and gee, how do I do that? So I've learned all the stuff after the fact, in other words. So the reason why I brought that up, I don't want you to think that I was, you know, figuring all this stuff out and then applying it, because I'm certainly nowhere near that smart. So
it came through practice, actual live experience.
Yeah, live. Practicing that I've done usually doesn't have too much to do with anything other than finger exercises. Live playing is where I've learned all my hammering techniques and everything. They're all thought up and done right on stage live, you know, which is kind of the best place, you know, trial by fire, more or less. So, yeah, that's about it for the right hand, I think. Oh, sometimes I use 4 fingers, but that little finger never gets a quite good enough callus on it, so it catches. So you'll hear it in there.
What about raking strings technique?
Yeah, that's another right-handed technique, and what that consists of basically of when you rake fingers across, similar to a garden rake, which is probably where they got the name from.
Exactly.
Actually, I didn't know what it was called until Tim Bogart, who I stole the idea from in my early days. Tim, well, and as well now, he's my total hero on bass, and he did tons of raking techniques. And when I first started bass and listened to him, I realized that I had to be a finger player because there's no way you could do those on with a pick. Those sweeping techniques are popular now, and they're very close to it, but there's still a lot of things you can do raking that you can't do with a pick. So I stole it from Tim Bogart, so I had to give him credit for that. But it's basically a way to slip your fingers over the strings and get a whole bunch of notes out of just one pass, because your fingers are staggered, and they kind of catch at different times. So you get that. Now that particular move there, that's a four finger. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So we can really get some wailing, a whole bunch of flailing notes coming out of there like that.
This seems like a good way to build right-hand speed.
Yeah, well, the speediest things I do are probably the raking stuff, because there's just so many notes whip by. If I ever had to go back and transcribe or figure out what it was, I'm doomed, because I don't even know what half the notes are that sneak by there. But that's definitely one of the secrets of getting a lot of speed out of the instrument, if that's your goal, to be a speedy player. But it also adds a fluidity to your speed, because things are flowing and raking and being pulled across in the same direction and stuff like that. And it makes speed for speed's sake is pointless, but if it's fluid and musical,
exactly, in context.
Yeah, which is where raking kind of comes in. It makes it a little bit more musical, more rhythmic. Stuff like that.
Would you say between the three-finger technique, the raking, and then the four-finger, you have your basic favorite right-hand patterns?
Yeah.
That you use 90% of the time?
Pretty much, yeah. The only other thing I do is the tapping stuff, which, that's another story. But yeah, that's basically it. The most important thing for anybody, I think, is that locked, thumb locked, strap, length, all those little crazy things that you would never think of.
All the little variables.
Yeah, locked in there, good spot, hands in the right position, playing with a lot of strength to get a really good, strong, hard, solid callus, because that'll have a lot to do with the tone of your playing. So however hard your fingertip is how easy it slips over the strings. I always have used rotosound strings, and they're very rough strings. They're tough. Tough on the frets, but for tone, I can't play anything else, really. And they grab your finger real well. So there's a real there's a real catch to it. So there's a percussive attack at the note. Now, pick bass players got an advantage because they can get their attack from that pick sound.
Exactly.
Where finger players, you got to get a big, hard, solid callus to kind of mimic that, and give you that attack. Producers will drive you crazy and ask you to play with the pick if you don't have it. So warn you in advance. Make sure you get that callus up there to save yourself some trouble later.
What can you tell us about recovery muscles?
Most of your moves you do on bass have to do with pulling your hands in towards your thumbs, towards the thumb on the back of the neck. You're pushing down on the strings to push them up against the frets, or you're plucking up towards your thumb when you're plucking from the right hand. So it's all that pull muscle. You almost never see anyone working on the muscle to get your finger back into the position where it can pull again. And that's the whole idea of exercising recovery muscles. In other words, it's not the muscle that you use to pull in. It's a muscle used to push out. So there's some kind of rubber band thing somebody sent me one time that you can exercise your hands with. But you'll find if you push up against, try to lift your finger up and oppose against it like that.
Yes.
And each finger you'll find is very, very weak, where down, of course, is very strong. So if you exercise that muscle, you'll find that 50% of your moves is recovery to get to the next move. So when you press down on a note, you got to lift up to get to the next note. When it comes to doing something fast, you're going to have to get up and down fast. So you're going to find that by exercising your recovery muscle, as crazy as it might seem, actually helps a lot in your speed and accuracy and the fluidity of your hands. This is just a thing that came out of nowhere one time, and I started working on my recovery muscles, and I found that every time I did, my playing took you know, a leap into a little bit more exactness and a little less slop that I normally have a lot of. So, but yeah, the recovery muscles is kind of a, people always, that's one of the things that gets overlooked easily.
And a trill would be a good way to develop that?
Yeah, you could, or just put your finger on there and oppose it and push up against it a bit so that you're, you know, pushing against your finger there a little bit.
You know, you've played with some of the greatest technical players, guitar-wise, of our time, you know, in a close band situation or touring. Where do you think technique is going for the 90s? It's been developed heavily in the 80s.
Well,
what do you think is going to happen?
I think it's peaked and it's reached total overkill to the point where it's technique for technique's sake, which is a total waste and total, you know, it's a horrible situation for music to be in. Because I come from a song era, song playing, you know, Three Dog Night, Young Rascals, all these bands that had great songs, and this is stuff. I always played in a band that had a lot of vocals in my early days, and so songwriting to me is really essential. So now a lot of songs are built around just technique, technique, technique. Well, let's find a song where we can fit all this in because we want everybody to hear this technique. It's just like, the new band I have, Mr. Big, we're writing things exactly the opposite. We're writing a song, getting a piece of music down that's really, you know, where we think it's at, and then adding playing to it, you know, because that's how my playing evolved. We go up and play, you know, Three Dog Night songs, Joy to the World, in the early days of bar band copy tunes, and, you know, we'd be flying all over the place in them, you know, and having fun with it, because once you got a good song, a good foundation, then you take off. It's gone the opposite nowadays. I just think a lot of people have kind of lost touch with that, because everybody's wowed by the hot kid on the block, and that's real cool, but, you know, it really doesn't have the dimension and the staying power that a song does. A song is everything.
Do you feel also that as a musician it's important to have a lot of song repertoire in your background?
Oh, yeah.
To create and to improvise better and to feel comfortable?
Everybody, when I was playing in a bar band for so many years, we used to get these elitists that talk about playing original material. You got to be original and be original. Well, we were always a copy band. But as it turns out, that was like, you know, the Beatles.
Yeah.
There was an original bone in their bodies, you know, when they first, you know, started. They were playing all the Servicemen's Club in Germany, and even their first record was a bunch of copy tunes on it. Please, Mr. Postman, Twist and Shout, all that stuff.
Roll Over Beethoven.
Yeah, and that's where you really get your chops. Just like you learn other people's solos, by learning other people's songs and playing and performing and getting an audience to react to them. That's where you learn. You know, the basis. Everybody talks so much about technique and all these things. Why are we doing it? Are we doing it to solo for the rest of our lives? We're doing it to get up in front of people and perform and make something happen with an audience, or have a record that touches many people. And you're not going to do that necessarily with lots of soloing. You're going to do that with a song. And the whole purpose of being in music for me is to get up on stage and entertain people. It's not necessarily just sit there and solo all night long. That's crazy. So many people get into that too much now. And it's just, I think if people just kind of focused on their real goal in music, which should be to be up in front of people performing, you know, doing something that's going to touch a lot of people and have a common ground between you and a lot of other people, I think then you get back to songwriting, you know. So
communication.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the old days of playing in bars, we had to make our living by getting people in the bar, staying all night, buying drinks, picking up girls, whatever they did, but they had to get there and stay there. And the only way we did that was by playing the best songs we could find from every band, doing the best way possible. And that was like the best training ground ever. It has a lot to do with my playing, my techniques, my whole point of view, because as I said, the foundation of it is not soloing technique, you know, and unfortunately it's bad that guitar has gone that way, but it'll be even worse if more bass players do that. I feel in a lot of ways have created some monsters out there, and that a lot of guys, the first thing they pick up the bass, they start doing hammer-ons. That's great, that's really neat, but if out of 500 bands that you could conceivably get in, maybe 10 of them you'll be able to take a solo in. Of those 10, maybe 20 or 30 seconds. So here's guys devoting their whole lives to all this stuff. Well, they'll actually only be able to do 20 or 30 seconds of it live ever, you know?
And what about the groove?
That's where it's at. I mean, that's, you know, I learned about playing drums. I used to, in the old bands, used to rehearse with just the drummer alone. We used to learn all our songs and just going just bass and drums. Just, you know, no guitar, no vocals, just learning grooves, learn how to work with drums, pound along with them, stay in time. And we always had to get audiences dancing in the early days, so we always had to make it move. We always had to make it groove and slide, and we're always really successful. Tell us back in Buffalo, like we held every attendance record at every club. They stopped counting after a while, you know. It was like for over a decade, or from 72 to 84 5, I mean, Tallis was around in Buffalo, so we certainly cut our teeth on that. A principle that I use with my left hand that I began or noticed first on my right hand is that